I recently saw David Bruckner's The Ritual, a horror film set in the forests of northern Sweden. A while back, I made a video on hylophobia, or fear of forests, something that I think this film does a great job tapping into. Stuck in a labyrinth of trees, the characters can only see a few meters in front of them. There are some incredible set designs too, and the creature is unlike anything I've seen in a horror film before. However, The Ritual also made me incredibly angry, but for reasons I'll divulge later. You'll also notice that I've come up with a few more solutions than I normally do. The film, mercifully, wastes no time jumping into the plot. Four friends, Luke, Dom, Hutch, and Rob, set out on a 4-day hike of the Kungsleden, or King's Trail in northern Sweden. On the third day of the hike, Dom injures his knee. Hutch convinces them to take a shortcut through a forest in order to finish the hike sooner so that Dom doesn't need to walk as far on his injured knee.
I used to be an adventurer like you.
In the forest, they come across a deer that has been gutted and impaled on the tree's lower branches, much to the disgust of the group. By nightfall, they're still in the forest. They find an abandoned cabin and decide to stay there for the night as the weather has gone all Canada on them. Inside the cabin, they find a weird statue of a human torso with antlers for hands. Luke, our main character, has a strange dream that night and awakes to find himself outside the cabin with strange wounds on his chest. The others also have nightmares, and Phil is found praying, naked, to the statue. Dom gets frustrated walking on his injured knee and decides to follow an unmarked path, insisting that it must lead to civilization. The group reluctantly follows him. By evening, they're still in the forest. Luke has more strange dreams that night and awakes to find that Hutch is missing. The three friends follow what sound like Hutch's screams deeper in the forest, but by the time they find him, he's been gutted and impaled on a tree, just like the deer. The three carry on in their attempt to escape the woods. By that evening, they can see lights of a settlement nearby, but before they can embark, a giant creature grabs Rob and carries him away. Terrified, Luke and Dom make a break for the settlement. On the way, they see Rob's body hung from the trees. They reach the settlement, but instead of receiving help, they're bound and held captive. The people there have the same marks on their chest that Luke has. They explain to him that the creature in the woods is a Jotun, a bastard offspring of the Norse god Loki. They worship the Jotun, and in return, they're granted a naturally long life. That night, Dom is sacrificed to the Jotun, leaving Luke as the only one still alive. He's able to escape his restraints by giving himself a backwards thumbs up. He then encounters a room filled with ancient worshippers and sets them on fire in a strangely casual fashion. Angered by the death of its followers, the Jotun slaughters the remaining worshippers, blaming them for Luke's actions. Luke then attempts to shoot it for some reason, but it only manages to get its attention. It forces Luke to bow before it, but Luke attacks it with an axe and escapes the forest as the sun breaks over the horizon. The Jotun, unable to leave the forest, bellows its frustration, and Luke reciprocates. The film ends with Luke walking towards signs of civilization in the distance. Before we can pit ourselves against the Jotun from The Ritual, we need to run an itinerary of what options our protagonists have. The protagonists can only use the tools, time, and information available to them. For example, our characters couldn't say, I don't know, use a nuke to defeat the Jotun because they don't have a nuke. They don't have it. You can use this information to come up with your own solutions if you so desire. We also need to discuss the abilities, motivations, and potential limitations of the Jotun if we're going to figure out a way to defeat it. The film is set on and around the King's Trail in northern Sweden, and though a specific year is never given, we will assume that the year is 2017, since that's when the film was released. The King's Trail is only traversable in the summer, and typically there is some snow on the ground in June and in September, which we see in the film. But because the King's Trail is above the Arctic Circle, the sun doesn't set at all in June. The film does have a day-night cycle, so therefore the film must take place in September. We join the group on their third day of a 4-day hiking trip, but Luke doesn't make it out of the forest until the morning of the 7th day. Since we know they're facing south in this scene, based on the position of the sun, we can apply the Pythagorean theorem and divide by the total number of ellipses to give us a quantum polynomial equation. We take that equation and turn it into a deciduous nuclear integral, and if we solve for a banana, we get the address of a website, which tells us what time it is. And it turns out that it's about noon when they decide to enter the forest. From the time they enter, it takes Luke 90 hours in total to escape. For equipment, the group has tents, rain gear, a camping stove, water bottles, a knife, and a compass. Luke is seen smoking cigarettes, so presumably he has a lighter. Hypothetically, the camping stove indicates that they have food, but they don't eat anything the entire film. The last thing they have is a map, and oh boy, let me tell you about this fucking map. First, the map is clearly labeled as Serkis National Park, which is not where the King's Trail is. Serkis National Park is 40 kilometers southwest of the King's Trail. Despite this, the map has the King's Trail on it. Second, the elevation lines on the map suggest that the forest isn't really a forest. It's more like a fucking mountain. The elevation of the forest is at least 700 meters higher than the trail they're on. Third, if the position of his finger on the map is supposed to indicate where they're starting from, they're also going to have to cross a river. So either this is the worst map ever made, or Hutch really hates Dom and wants to punish him by making him swim through a river and then walk over a fucking mountain with an injured knee. In either case, what the fuck? Now let's discuss the Jotun. The Jotun in the ritual is a grotesque monstrosity with an elk-like body, a human torso for a head, and small hands that it uses to inspect its victims. It's immortal, and though it can be damaged, our protagonists have no tools in their possession capable of killing it. They don't have a nuke, okay? No, they didn't bring one. It's too big, it wouldn't fit in their bag, so it's not really an option. So if you suggest nuking it, I will have to maim you severely. It can torment its victims with hallucinations, though it's not clear what purpose this serves. The Jotun wants some to worship it, and to kill others as a sacrifice, but the criteria by which it chooses isn't clear. This deer was apparently not worthy. The worshipper who talks to Luke says that the Jotun will kill anything that doesn't bow to it, but Dom wasn't given a choice, and when Luke decides not to bow, it forces him to anyways. It appears to choose certain people as worshippers and others as sacrifices by some unknown criteria. It marks its chosen worshippers with chest wounds that form the Norse rune for property. It is very adamant that its worshippers not leave the forest, as it can't leave either. Those that worship it are granted unnaturally long life, best illustrated by the room full of mummified but still living worshippers. The last obstacle that the group needs to overcome or avoid are the worshippers. Presumably, they're the ones who have been carving runes on the trees. The runes they encounter in front of the cabin roughly translate to home of intense hardship. And within the cabin, 2 runes are hung which mean property of the elk. You'll notice that the post that Dom is tied to when he's sacrificed is actually a giant rune of the word elk. So those are the conditions that the characters are up against. Now, to solve their dilemma, we will try to use solutions that either save more lives, end the conflict sooner, or present less risk for our protagonists. Hi, I'm a shark, and when I'm looking for the fastest and safest way to use the internet, I use SurfsharkVPN. Surfshark hides your internet traffic from interested parties, such as hackers, ISPs, and those damn whales. Surfshark gives me peace of mind when I'm using public Wi-Fi or when online banking. They use an unbreakable encryption that guarantees your data is safe. And when I need to unwind from a long day of hunting endangered sea turtles, Surfshark has server locations in over 60 countries, which means that you can get around region locks on Netflix, Disney+, Amazon Prime, and more. And when I'm on the go, which is all the time because I'm a shark, I can use Surfshark on unlimited devices with a single subscription, including my browser, desktop, phone, game consoles, you name it. You can get Surfshark VPN at surfshark.deal/filmherald and enter the promo code FilmHerald for 83% off and 3 extra months for free. In Canadaland dollars, that works out to the insanely low price of just $2.79 a month. And if you're still not convinced in the first 30 days, you can get get a full refund. The first solution targets the Jotun's behavior. It seems to follow the protagonists as they wander through the forest, but it never attacks them during the day. Every night, however, it picks off one of the members of the group. The only night the Jotun doesn't kill them is the first, probably because they're inaccessible in the cabin. So the solution then is to cabin hop their way across the forest. In the first 2 days, they come across 2 abandoned cabins. All they need to do is stay in the cabins at night and travel during the day. Theoretically, that should keep them safe from the Jotun. If they can't find a cabin to stay in, then they could climb a tree. Now we know that the Jotun is quite large, and as such it has quite a reach, which is why it can impale its victims on branches in the first place. But if they climbed high enough, they may be able to stay safe at night if there are no cabins to stay in. In all honesty though, this is a no good, very bad solution. At the first cabin, when Luke has a nightmare, he wakes up outside the cabin, and Rob is found worshipping the idol upstairs. This suggests that in addition to giving people nightmares, the Jotun can also make them sleepwalk. It could get its victims to walk out of a safe dwelling, or climb down from a tree they're hiding in. Another problem is that the cabins they find may not be abandoned. If they run into the worshippers, they're unlikely to get away because they don't know that the worshippers are hostile. And the last problem is that even if they manage to avoid the worshippers and stay inside a shelter at night, if they had to climb a tree, this thing could probably knock it over. We saw in the film that it nearly knocks trees over just by walking through the forest. So this solution has a lot of flaws, but not to worry. I have another 37,802 left, and I've got a good feeling about the rest of them. Moving on. This solution is pretty dumb, but I don't know, what if Luke just stayed in the forest and worshipped the Jotun? Yes, his friends would all still be killed and he wouldn't get to leave the forest, blah blah blah, big sad. On the upside, he would get to live for hundreds or maybe thousands of years. I mean, that's a pretty big upside, am I wrong here? Luke doesn't mention having any other friends or family or loved ones. Maybe this elk with a torso for a face could be his friend. All he needs to do is kneel and accept Jotun Christ as his Lord and Savior. There are only a few downsides here. The first is just not being able to leave the forest, which, yeah, would suck. The other problem is that there aren't that many romantic prospects among the worshippers, unless you're into G-MILFs. But the major downside is that even if he gets to live that long, he'll end up as some shrunken, pointless husk that they'll stuff into the attic with all the rest of the old people. And the romantic interests get real slim up there. What do you think? Could this be the answer? No? I'm seeing a lot of no's. Moving on! This solution is even worse than the others, and I know what you're thinking. Film Gams, those solutions were hot garbage. How could this possibly be worse? Well, just you wait, my very cruel friend. Your comments are very hurtful. The worshipper he speaks with says that he can either kneel before the Jotun or it will kill him, but he doesn't kneel, and it doesn't kill him. It seems very determined to make him kneel, and it also doesn't seem that interested in killing him. So why doesn't he just leave? Instead of trying to shoot it or attacking it with the axe, just walk out of there. What's the problem? Oh, you're saying that it doesn't dramatically change the outcome? What's that? All his friends are still dead and he didn't get out any sooner and there wasn't any less risk?
What's that? He's a talentless boob?
Well, I did say this is worse than the other two. Moving on! Now you may notice that this video is nearly over and we still have 37,800 solutions to get through. Well, we've come to the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. The last and most obvious solution is to not go in the forest. I live in British Columbia and occasionally I do a bit of hiking. I have even hiked with someone who sprained their ankle very far away from the end of the trail, much like the situation faced by the protagonists. And I have never, not even once, thought that it would be a good idea to go off trail to save time. The original reason they went off trail was to get to the lodge faster because of Dom's injured knee. And quote, I'm not doing 14 hours on this. Well, on this quote unquote shortcut, he does 75 hours on his injured knee and then he dies. They didn't know that would be the outcome, but they did know what they could see on this fucking map, which is that the shortcut through the forest means climbing over a 700-meter mountain. The marked trail, in contrast, has no such elevation gain. So which one do you think will be better on his knee? Like I said, I've hiked with someone who is injured, and yes, it takes longer, but it doesn't mean that your immediate reaction should be to trailblaze into unfamiliar terrain. Which brings me to my second point. Having a map and a compass are great. Well, not this map, but there is still plenty of opportunity to get lost when there is no official trail to follow. Dom's decision to follow this trail in the wrong direction is a perfect example. They have no phone reception, no GPS, and no emergency beacon if things go wrong. It is baffling to me that they would take such a huge risk with no backup plan, no modern equipment, armed only with a compass and the worst map ever. Every second they spend in the forest is another moment they could change their minds and head back to the trail. Since the first person is killed on the second night, if they can get back to the trail before then, they'll be able to get out of the forest without suffering any casualties. If you do the math, they have 37,800 seconds before they must turn around and get out of the forest before the second night. Therefore, there are 37,800 seconds and 37,800 moments they decided to keep going instead of turning around. Each one would get the protagonists out of the forest faster, with less risk, and no loss of life whatsoever. It is by far the best way to beat the ritual. And if you find yourself in a similar situation, I urge you to use just one of those solutions. Turn around and head back on the trail. But if you disagree and you think that you have a better idea, please let us all know about it in the comments, and I may feature it in the comments versus the ritual video coming out next month. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been the Film Herald.